The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Can Ontario get 1.5 million new homes built by 2031? It was an election pledge. Now it's driving new legislation. Tonight, we'll assess the advisability of the plan to use all the tools available, as Premier Ford puts it. Then, military historian Ted Barris is here on his new book, recalling Canada's critical role in the longest campaign of World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic. It's Wednesday, November 9th, and that's ahead on the agenda. While it doesn't quite roll off the tongue, the More Homes Built Faster Act does make plain what its objective is. It's a major overhaul that touches everything from municipal planning to development charges. It's in addition to the moves that open the Greenbelt for housing developments and the granting of new strong mayor powers. Is it enough or too much to move the needle on the housing crisis? Let's ask. Ian Underwood, she is Chief Executive Officer at Habitat for Humanity, Greater Toronto Area. Shoshana Sachs, Assistant Professor of Civil Engineering and Canada Research Chair in Sustainable Infrastructure at the University of Toronto. Maziar Mortazavi, President and CEO of TAS, an urban development company based here in the capital city. And Jacob DeWong, data scientist and a member of the advocacy group More Neighbours Toronto. And it is lovely to have bodies in this studio again after talking to boxes for 2.5 years. Great to see everybody here.
Good to be here.
Let's do a little background first, because a few weeks ago, the Ontario government did introduce the More Homes Built Faster Act. It really does not roll off the tongue. It aims to boost Ontario housing supply by 1.5 million homes over 10 years, and here's some of what's in it. Reducing development charges for the construction of affordable housing units. Reducing parkland requirements for the construction of affordable housing units, allowing up to 3 residential units on property that currently has only been zoned for 1. That's as of right zoning, they call that. Restricting third-party appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and limiting the ability of Ontario's conservation authorities to appeal development plans. And let's do one more graphic here. We want to show the difference between the supply completions compared to the growth of population. And for those listening on podcast who can't see this graph, suffice to say we've got 2 lines going across the screen here. The population growth of adults is significant, and the housing completions is a lot smaller. And the gap seems to be widening as the years go on. We start in 2003 when the lines were closer together, and then about midway through the teens, the gap really got big. Thus, we have what they call a housing crisis. Okay, Ian and Maziar, I want to start with you because you're both builders. Do you know why Ontario housing starts have been flat for almost 20 years, even as the population has been increasing and demand is going up? Let's get into that. Ian, start us off.
Well, I think it was a great graph to put up, because I think what we should also think about, that blue line, the population growth line, let's think about who those people are, right? Population growth is coming mainly from newly forming young families as well as new immigrants. And so in both of those categories, initially, they don't have a lot of money for their homes. So what's the bottom line, the orange line of how much is being built, what was also notable is what was not being built was very much affordable housing. We went through 2 decades of very little government funding to affordable housing and purpose-built rental. So that chart is showing us, we had that period that not only were we not building enough homes, we weren't building the right kind of homes. We weren't building homes that people can afford. And so here we are talking about an act that says, how do we build more homes faster?
Maziar, why are those 2 lines so far apart?
I think I would build on what Ian is saying, and I think it has a lot to do both in terms of the process of getting supply into the market, in terms of development approvals and the timelines to get things approved, but it's also coupled by the labor forces who are actually delivering the product, and the fact that we are constrained and have actually a reverse curve on labor supply as it relates to the people doing the work.
So it takes too long to get stuff approved. And then when it does get approved, you haven't got enough people to build it.
Exactly.
Something like that. Can you just take us through a typical project? You have an idea to build something.
For sure.
From idea to the first person moving in, how long does that take?
If we were to use an average building that is, say, 12 to 15 stories tall, 200 plus minus units, that's a 7-year process.
7 years because what's the thing that makes it 7 years as opposed to 3?
You're looking at typically about 2 years from an approval process standpoint.
So to get all the permits and
get
get
all
it through
the
City
permits
Hall?
in the City
all that.
Hall. So
Okay.
it's 2 to 3 years on that side. You're about a year into sales and marketing, and you're about 3 to 4 years to build.
Is that your experience at Habitat?
Well, so what we're building isn't of the magnitude that Mazair has referred to, but I'll give you an example of he talked about 12 stories high. I'll give you a 12-unit story, also 7 years. So one of our developments, and this is pretty typical, we've got a 12-unit development in one of the 905 areas. We bought the land in 2017. Families will move into homes in 2024, 7 years. The construction will take 1 year. We will start construction in 2023. It'll take a year. So it's been a 6-year development phase, and that's not unusual.
And you guys are Habitat for Humanity.
And we're Habitat for Humanity.
You've got God in your corner.
And time, well, and a lot of volunteers and a lot of people who get the issue and care about it. And yet we're subject to the same approval process, which has led us to being 23rd. To Canada's 23 out of 24 OECD countries on how long it takes to get a shovel in the ground. We do have to speed that up.
Okay, let me go to the other side of the table. And before I draw upon both of your expertise as experts in your field, I just want to ask, how do I put this delicately? You're from a younger generation than I am, let's put it that way. And we know how hard it is for the younger generation, particularly in the capital city, to get housing, to buy their first homes. How tough was it for you?
I was really lucky in that I've owned my home since 2010. So I had an unusual good luck having to do with a bunch of things, including how young I got married. But what it's meant for my friends is that a lot of them have left the city, and that I'm the oldest I could possibly be. If I was any younger, I would not be able to live in the city of Toronto. If you look at, I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, if you look at my colleagues, the people who are 30 years older than me on the same job own a big house in the annex. The people who are 5 years younger than me live in an apartment half an hour or 45 minutes from the university.
And will probably never buy a home in the city.
Very unlikely.
Very unlikely. And why? Okay, you said you were sort of lucky enough to get in under the wire. What's the wire? You know what I'm saying? Like what? How come the older professors are able to have nice big homes in the annex, but the younger people are not?
There's many things that happened, one of which was we didn't build enough homes for our population, and not just our population, family formations. Families are smaller than they used to be, so we need more houses for the same number of people. But also things got really, really expensive very quickly, and the cost of housing went up much faster than salaries.
What's your experience, Jacob?
Well, like Shoshana, I count myself pretty lucky. I rent a rent-controlled apartment right now in Liberty Village, but just knowing how hard the search was 3 years ago in 2019, I'm looking forward to the day where I get to move in with my partner and maybe start a family, but I'm also kind of dreading that moment because it means that we're going to have to look for a more suitable place, and those are really hard to come by right now. I don't think that if and when we decide to start a family, I don't think we would be able to stay in Toronto the way things are right now.
How old are you?
I am 26.
20. So you're pretty young still.
Yes.
But and you're in rental right now. But do you think at some point in your life you will be able to buy a home?
I hope so. I would like to hope so. I don't think that it's on the table right now, at least in the places where we would want to live in the Greater Toronto area, and near the places where my partner grew up, next to our families and friends. I don't see that on the table right now.
Is it an option for you? As frankly, a lot of people who work in this building, a lot of people I know who work for TVO, have decided over the past couple of years, the pandemic provided them, I guess, the impetus to say, you know what, we're never going to own a home here. We're moving an hour away. We're moving to Hamilton. We're moving to whatever, Pickering. Is that an option for you?
I'd say that the housing crisis has gotten so bad that's not only about driving an hour away. We're seeing some of my friends, family moving to places like London or even out of the province. A lot of my friends from university, they've chosen to move to Alberta, to Calgary or Edmonton, where housing is just more attainable, and there's a good enough opportunity job-wise there that it just makes more sense to move away completely away, not just an hour, but maybe 4 hours flight.
4 hours flight?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Like four hours by plane. So like to Alberta or or further.
Gotcha. You've been reading those subway ads again.
Yeah, I guess.
They're all over the subways here.
really
Come
does-
to Alberta.
It really does touch a nerve with my generation. Yeah.
And it's not just people in their 20s, it's people in their 30s as well. I recently was talking to a friend who moved to London, England, and he said, it's so much better here than it is in Toronto because I can afford to have a reasonable quality of life. In London, England.
In London?
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in.
Yeah, but from all the metrics and from lived experience, it's a more affordable place than Toronto.
Okay, let's follow up on some of the issues we raised before. You talked about how difficult it is to get something from idea to somebody moving in 7 years. We now live in a world of 5, 6, 7% inflation. So your prognostications when you start a project are X, and then plus 7%, plus 7%, plus 7%. Okay, I want to know how you do your business in a world where you've got to purchase supplies over a lengthy period of time in a world where inflation is that big. How do you do that?
Listen, I think that is really the new paradigm that we're shifting into. We have all been spoiled by a very long period of relatively low cost of capital. And as that cost of capital is beginning to shift, it's compounding on supply chain issues that we've faced over the number of years, beginning in COVID, and then further compounded by what we touched on earlier in terms of labor supply and the lack of labor. We're facing a paradigm shift as it relates to home ownership. And that's just one of the realities that we're going to see in this marketplace, where the shift towards the rental market is going to become a profound reality in this market. And the big question we're struggling with as a company is how do you actually begin to deliver the ability for people to build equity through rental structures? And so for us, a big part of what we're seeing is not just the fact that we are changing tenure, we're also changing the fundamental underlying paradigms of how one begins to develop equity. And this idea of shared equity models is deeply tied into our impact strategies of how do you begin to share the ability of growth with the stakeholders involved in the life cycle, which to me is characteristic and fundamentally required when we think about resiliency and we think about sort of our cities through a multi-generational lens as opposed to a capital extraction one.
How do you do it?
Well, I think I was going to say two things. So starting with what you were asking about with the just the unpredictability, I think the other piece of that, in the legislation, and there's some criticism about it, but the legislation is taking some things and saying we need to freeze and set a point in time of what a developer can expect in terms of what these fees will be. And that, in a way, then de-risks at least a bit of the problem for the investor, right? Because investors are just putting as much, they have to allow for the risk. So the cost of financing for anything we build is actually affected by this uncertainty. I'm gonna though pick up on where Mazahir was going with equity, because what hasn't been talked about as much with all the media coverage from the announcements that were made is the announcement, kind of the headline when I heard it from the Premier and the ministers was, trying to regain an Ontario where Jacob, can aspire to own a home. And so there was a statement about a real commitment to attainable and affordable home ownership, and a sense that there's going to be more work done on that. That is really, it should be encouraging for all of us in Ontario. Most of that isn't yet baked into the legislation. There's a commitment to do more work on it, but it's something I do find very encouraging about the language that I am hearing.
Well, let me circle back to that legislation. I'll remind everybody the checklist that we had off the top, and I'll go to you first, Shoshana. Do you think that checklist of things is part of the solution to getting more homes built more quickly?
I think many things on that checklist are, but the last one, the disempowering of the conservation authorities, and many things that were left off that checklist, including the tearing up of our green standards or any environmental ambition, unfortunately are not. And so there are many things that we can hope for, and I think we would all agree on this panel that building 1.5 million new homes is a good goal. But doing it in a destructive, expensive way is just a waste of our future and our money.
I guess it's their view that giving conservation authorities the right to, in their judgment, interfere prolongs the ability of these folks over here to do what they're supposed to do. Not fair?
There's a problem here in that people don't want to just own a home, they want to live in it. And if a home that ends up underwater or flooded or destroyed is not a very good place to live.
What would you add to that, Jacob?
I'd say that when it comes to Bill 23 and the checklist that we just went over, there's a lot of small steps towards achieving the common sense reforms we need to build the 1.5 million homes. but I'm not seeing that we're 100% there yet. So for example, on the checklist, we saw that it will legalize 3 units across Ontario, but there's often a host of other roadblocks in the way. So for example, if the height limit is 1 story in a specific parcel of land, well, are you going to build a 1-story triplex? I don't think so. So we still have quite a ways to go when it comes to achieving those kinds of common sense reforms.
How much does this get us to where we need to go, this legislation?
It's a big start. I mean, I think everyone can agree this is the biggest, most far-reaching piece of housing legislation perhaps that this province has ever seen. And I think, given the magnitude of the problem that we opened with, I think what I do appreciate is this is a big, bold step forward, which is probably the magnitude of step we need at this point in time. And so what I like is kind of how bold it is here. The recognition is that's going to be very uncomfortable for all of us, and they're not getting everything right. You can't get everything right when you're trying to move quickly. So I also like the fact that there's a commitment to, they're continuing to bring out waves of new legislation and correct as we go. Specific to what's in it, my colleagues have talked about some of the things. You opened by talking about the fees for organizations like ours. We are averaging $130,000 to $160,000 per habitat home in the GTA that we pay to the government, to the 3 levels of government. So the exemption for the development charges, parkland dedications, for us is huge. Also not in the legislation, but signaled in the announcement, is this government's intention to work with the feds on HST. We pay $70,000 of HST for habitat homes. So those are things like the more we pay for that, the less we are helping the very families that are most struggling. Those are good things. There are good things in there that relate to speeding up approvals. And as my colleagues have talked about, there's some pieces in there about density. I got a list of improvements, but you asked, what am I liking? So there are things that, given the magnitude of what we are dealing with, I quite appreciate the bravery of what is in here and how much has been thought through.
Well, let me pick on the 2 things that you talked about. You said an approvals process that takes way too long, and we can't get the workers we need once we get approval. Are there things in this act that will improve on those 2 things?
I think the unlocking of the blockages in the process are relevant and they're important. I do also believe that while we can't have interference, we also have to recognize that there is incredible value in having engagement up front with the breadth of stakeholders who are going to be living in the neighborhoods and in the communities that are affected by where development comes in. And so there is a need for the industry and for the municipalities to think about different processes to get us to different places. I think the saying is that you repeat sort of the same actions hoping for different outcomes. Well, that's insanity. So we need to get out of the sense of the insane. This is also an opportunity for multi-level government collaboration. Our immigration policies are set at the federal level, and a recognition that the province and the feds need to be collaborating in terms of how we actually sort of looking at those needs through immigration policies that are going to be supplementary to the housing policies that are being introduced. And so it does require, this is the first step. I completely agree with Ian. It's about progress over perfection, but we have to keep iterating around this and using different ways of collaboration to unlock what has been presented.
What about Shoshana's point that it's all well and good to house people or get more homes for people, but if you're going to defang the conservation authorities, or if you're going to allow less parkland to be included than might otherwise be advisable, we're not going to be further ahead at the end of the day. What's your take on that?
Listen, we have always been a bit of a outlier relative to the industry in that we fundamentally believe that we are stewards, we are not owners. And as generational stewards, the decisions we make today and the implications they have for future generations needs to be fundamentally considered. Our industry has been stuck doing things the way they've always known how to do them, but it's time for innovation. It's time for change. We need to be thinking about the environmental impact that our buildings have and the way that we build our cities and the contributions they have to both the carbon footprint, but to the broader sort of environmental assets that we have. And so I completely concur that it can't be a wholesale sort of approach where you sort of, you don't build housing at any cost, because the housing is part of an ecosystem. It's part of society, and the environmental contributions and the environmental role are fundamental for future generations, and we can't sort of spite them in terms of just trying to deliver what we need today.
How confident are you that at some point, in this orgy to get housing built, at some point somebody's going to build on a floodplain and a conservation authority is not going to be allowed to make a deputation to oppose it, and at the end of the day, this is not going to work out?
I'm 100% confident that if there aren't changes in the bill, which I hope that Ina's right, it will be iterations, and before it's passed, things will be changed. I'm 100% confident that that will happen. And I think it's important to talk about the environment as something for our kids, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about things being destructive now. We have more floods already than we experience. If you've been on the floodplain, it's not just that the houses in that neighborhood get flooded. It changes floodplains for everybody nearby. So existing houses also are a higher risk. I'm not talking about things going wrong in 20 years when my kids are grown up. I'm talking about someone buying a house and their basement flooding 2 years later. And what most people don't know is that your home insurance doesn't cover that. Because the risk of flood has been going up so quickly, floods are being pulled out of almost everybody's home insurance. And then also, the bill as currently written makes green standards not viable, which means that all new homes built would be much more expensive to run. And if the bill passes as currently written, I see a thing in a couple years where we're like, oh, we've got to be careful not to buy a house that came in after 2022 because my energy bills will be twice as high.
I think we have to be a bit careful here, because my understanding of the legislation as it relates to conservation authorities is it's specifically saying conservation authorities should continue to play a role in exactly what you're talking about, of anything that relates to floods, natural hazards, or personal safety. I think the intention is to rein in the level of involvement. And I've got a colleague that runs a habitat in a smaller Ontario community. They've got a 4-unit development that's not even in a floodplain. The fees they have to pay to their local conservation authority for their approval process is more than they're paying to the municipality for the rest of the development fees.
Hold that thought. Would you agree that doesn't make any sense?
Yes.
Okay. Consensus. Keep going.
There you go. So, well, I think that, I think we are all concerned about things like green standard and the way buildings are built. And for me, when I first heard that, I assume I'm working in the part that's in the unintended, that's an unintended consequence. I think it's being talked about a lot, and I would sure hope to see adjustments that get made as we see this go through the multiple readings.
But I think it also highlights a bigger systematic issue in the process, which we talked about in the kinds of delays, is that the system is working in silos. The departments within the municipality work in silos. Then you have externals like conservation authorities who work in their silos. So all of a sudden, when you're going through an application process, you get clearance from one group, and then another group steps in and says, actually, no, we don't approve it. And then you cycle back again, and then you cycle back again.
What's the alternative to that?
Well, it's about the alignment. Right? It's about having people, it's about actually looking at the inputs to the process and aligning them up front and ensuring that you actually have consensus within the system and everyone shows up as a partner, not as yet again another layer to sort of get through.
And I'd say it's about balancing authority. Right? And this was, the Housing Affordability Task Force, of which I was a member. A lot of it was about how do we get a better balance? Because the challenge is inadvertently in the need to have everyone involved, heritage parks, transportation, local neighbors, that the experience for those of us trying to build homes is housing is what you get. Housing is what comes out the other end, what's left over after you consider all of those things. So I think what the effort here is to say, how do we achieve a better balance of these considerations? Because we do, per what you put on the screen at the beginning, we have a housing we have a real housing crisis for people who are suffering every day because of their need for a place that works for their family.
But Jacob, I gather you would like to see what they're calling more gentle density. I mean, we're not talking about 50-story condos going up in every neighborhood, but somewhat more. Will this get us there?
It'll get us partly there. So, part of that point about triplexes and allowing up to 3 units, it'll get us part of the way there. But what that doesn't help right now, at least, is the part about feasibility on every single plot and making that economically feasible and also physically feasible with all the other rules surrounding. So what I would really like to see is, from Ian's report from the Housing Affordability Task Force, is really invest some of that political capital into making the big changes now at the beginning of the mandate. Just go straight to what was recommended, which was 4 units and 4 stories across the province to really make this feasible. And in a leaked document from the government, we even saw that this triplex change is not actually going to create that many homes over the next decade. I think the number was 50,000. So I think, this is a housing crisis. We really need to go faster on this.
Well, one of the things that some people have advanced as an idea to encourage more construction of new homes is to build in a place called the Greenbelt. And if memory serves, I thought for sure that was not going to be an option in this. I thought let me think for a second. Didn't the Premier once upon a... Sheldon, do we have anything of Premier Ford talking about whether or not building in the Greenbelt would be acceptable?
Unequivocally, we won't touch the Greenbelt. Unlike other governments that don't listen to people, I've heard it loud and clear. People don't want me touching the Greenbelt. We won't touch the Greenbelt. We'll figure out how to clean up this housing mess and this housing crisis that we're facing in a different fashion.
Well, last Friday at 4 p.m., they changed their mind. There's going to be housing in the Greenbelt. What do we think of that?
It's really disappointing, in part because the Premier had promised multiple times, because of backlash of previous attempts to open up a Greenbelt, that this wasn't going to happen. We need to build 1.5 million homes in places where people want to live, in places where people will have access to good services. And building in the Greenbelt is the most expensive way to build new housing because it is away from existing services. It's on land that is protected for a good reason. And so it's asking to use some of our limited resources of the people we have to build houses, to build homes, to build in places that's going to be the most destructive and the most expensive.
The government's view is we are going to allow building in 7,400 acres of the Greenbelt, and in exchange, we're going to find another 9,400 acres somewhere else and protect that instead. So on balance, it's actually plus. Do you buy that?
No.
Because?
It's treating lands of equal value in equal places. If we pick up a piece of land really far away, it doesn't help provide flood control, it doesn't help provide clean air, it doesn't help provide food for the regions that are nearby. The Greenbelt needs to be where it is to help encourage people to build and live near existing infrastructure, which is really good bang for the buck, to help protect us from increasingly frequent natural disasters. And it's not just you just need a piece of land over there or a piece of land over here. They're of different value.
You know, I guess to the government's credit, they're not trying to say we never promised this. They understand that they are breaking a promise. Steve Clark, the municipal affairs minister, was very blunt in saying, yes, we're changing our position on this. But they say the crisis is such that it requires it. Naziar, do you believe that?
Listen, I go back to the fact that, great, we're going to open it up. Who's going to build it, right? How are we going to actually resource that? And I think that we still have such a surplus of lands within the urban areas and within the existing sort of buildable sort of zones that do we need to open up the Greenbelt? I'm not convinced yet. Am I open to the idea of exploring it? I think the fact that these policies were set 20 plus years ago around the Greenbelt, should there be considerations? The considerations can be made, but a wholesale opening up and swapping for lands of maybe not the same sort of quality and or lands that already have some designations that don't allow them to be built on doesn't necessarily sort of get us there. So I'm not convinced that the Greenbelt is the solution. I think we need to look at it from a system standpoint, and the availability of land is one piece of the system, but it's actually getting the people on the scaffolds, getting the trades out there, and getting sort of the work done is a huge part of it. We saw from the graph right off the top.
What's your take?
There's not a single person that's comfortable with this conversation about the Greenbelt for all the obvious
the Premier and the
reasons.
Municipal Affairs Minister are.
I think it's fair to say there's not a single person that can be comfortable. I think, the challenge is the Greenbelt is a policy that was set in 2005 when we had 2 million fewer people in the province, when the average price of homes was $350,000, when there wasn't a 407 running along and new transit stations being built. So I get the dilemma. The Housing Task Force said, can you try to stay away from that and work within municipal boundaries? That was what the Housing Task Force said. I think my comment would be, to the extent that if the government decides this is a direction to go in, the couple of things that I would hope we would see is an increase in the density requirements in anything they're doing there or anywhere else.
So not sprawl, in other words.
50,000 acres or 50,000 homes across 7,400 acres is 7 homes an acre. Townhomes are 20 to 25. So that would be my first thing, is if you're doing anything, raise the density level. And the second thing, and I may be missing it, but in what's come out, I haven't seen anything of if they do something in the Greenbelt, they also have to put an affordability requirement into that.
Well, I was going to say, if you're going to service all that land, presumably it's going to be expensive to put all those sewers in, to get all that hydro in, et cetera.
Well, yes and no. I think the language they've said is that if this happens, the landowners themselves have to carry the cost of all the infrastructure, from what I have read, which makes sense, because if they were to do that, the landowners have had that land, whether they're farmers, whether they're developers, whether they're someone else. So this would unlock a lot of economic value for them. I think the province is saying, yeah, so you're on the hook for infrastructure, but I would add, and you need to be on the hook for affordable and attainable housing. Going back to the fact that ideally, let's try to figure out where we can build homes in our existing zoned areas.
Got it, but a minute and a half to go here, and I want to ask you, Shoshana, you know, it's not as if, let me see this from the government, for argument's sake, I want to see this from the government's point of view. It's not as if the boundaries, the existing boundaries of the Greenbelt, came down from Mount Sinai. They were a result of a lot of political compromises that were made by the McGuinty government 15 years ago. Is it fair to say this government should be allowed to tinker with them a little bit without everybody coming down hard on their heads?
I think if you ask the question that way, you're setting me up to say, yeah, it's fair, you know, reasonable people should do reasonable things. But this isn't a reasonable thing. There's a huge amount of land already available to be developed. The myth that the Greenbelt is causing unaffordability has been around and has been debunked more times than I have fingers. It's just completely unnecessary and it's destructive. We need to build 1.5 million homes. This is a distraction from that. It's not going to help us, and it's going to compromise our future, our safety, and the pleasure of living in this province. Why do something that destructive when it is completely unnecessary?
Maybe because developers who make contributions to your political party are putting undue pressure on you to open it up?
You said it, not me.
But do you agree with it?
I don't even think that's an interesting question, because...
Jeez, I thought it was.
Sorry, interesting. For the topic, I think that we have an elected government that should be doing things for the best of the people of Ontario, both present and future. And so I think the question becomes, is this that? And it just isn't. We need 1.5 million homes. That doesn't mean 3,000 square foot homes surrounded by a white picket fence, which I think unfortunately is what the Premier is imagining. It means good places for people to live. Most people want to live in a community and walking distance to good services, and the most in-demand places to live are in existing cities where there's opportunities for jobs, for recreation. Opening the Greenbelt doesn't do that. We need to build homes where we need homes, not just any home anywhere.
I want to thank all four of you for coming into our studio tonight and having this conversation. Ian Underwood and Mazyar Mortazavi on the right-hand side of the table, Shoshana Sachs, Jacob DeWong on the left-hand side of the table. That's geographically, not politically, necessarily. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This being Remembrance Week, it's incumbent upon us to remember the sacrifices made by our forebears more than 7 decades ago. During World War II, the Royal Canadian Navy lost 24 warships, costing us more than 2,000 souls. The Merchant Navy lost 58 ships and more than 1,000 lives. But they did their job, which was to escort more than 25,000 merchant ships across the Atlantic during perilous times. Ted Barris chronicles those missions in his new book. It's called Battle of the Atlantic, Gauntlet to Victory. And it brings one of Canada's foremost military historians back to our studio, and it's so nice to see you again, Ted.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. This is the time.
Especially this week.
Well, this is the week for it, right? In essence, what was the job that our naval soldiers were required to perform?
Well, those in the Navy, the official Navy, and we only had 3,000 of them when the war broke out, and we only had 13 warships, so we were stretched pretty thin. But ultimately, they were given the responsibility of escorting all those numbers that you just articulated of freight and fuel from North America to Britain and back. And it's funny, you know, as a historian, it's so easy to get sucked into the battles because they're intense, they're deathly, they're memorable, victory, defeat, you know, life, death. But it took me a while. I got a letter from a friend of mine in Eastern Ontario, and she helped me put the real essence of this story and all the service you've alluded to into perspective. The letter she sent me was a letter that her aunt had written, her aunt from Haliburton, Ontario, living in Britain as the war broke out in 1939, telling her about what life was going to be like in England with the blackouts, the evacuations, and the rationing. And suddenly I realized the Battle of the Atlantic is about keeping Britain alive. And so the service of all those sailors and the merchant sailors getting freight to Britain and back, and essentially giving us the chance to one day launch the invasion in 1944 to retake Europe, really sort of hung on the ability of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Merchant Navy and the Air Force and a whole lot of citizens, average citizens, supporting those convoys from here to there and back.
I want to come at this story from a somewhat different angle, which is you have described what has happened on the Atlantic as a kind of 2,000-day-long sustained battle, single battle. And I'm not sure that most people normally think of it that way, as you would the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of Britain, which are very finite events.
They're also easier to describe that way because it's a sliver of the war.
Exactly. Yeah. So why do you describe it this way?
Because it is a battle that started on the 3rd of September 1939 when the Germans sank the Athenia, which was a passenger ship making its way from Ireland west. And then lasted until May the 8th, VE Day in 1945, when Admiral Karl Donitz, the German then Reichspresident, tells all the U-boats to surrender. It literally went 2,074 days. So how do you do that between the covers of a book? I did it by way of the people. And as I alluded to a second ago, recognizing that it was the individual survivability of the Brits, courtesy of all the work that the guys did, men and women who were in the Royal Canadian Navy and the Air Force and the Merchant Navy, it's essentially that gift that makes the story, all 2,074 days, leap off the page through the voices, the memories, the faces, the hurt, and the exhilaration of surviving in those people.
You just told us how unprepared we were in 1939 at the beginning of this war. And now, Sheldon, if you would bring up this graphic, because here's from the book on what happened after. At the beginning of the Second World War, Ted writes, Canada maintained a fleet of just 38 merchant ships. Its shipbuilding yards employed fewer than 4,000 workers. Within 6 years, however, that number would spike upward to 126,000 skilled men and women building 410 cargo ships at shipyards in British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritime Provinces. The contracts would generate $17 million in wages and nearly $1 billion worth of merchant ships. At the height of wartime shipbuilding in 1943, Canada's production of merchant ships, 150 cargo ships totaling 1,478,000 tons, was only 15% less than that of the United Kingdom. And Ted, my question is, how in heaven's name did we do that?
Well, Canadians stepping up for the large part of it. I mean, we only had about 3,000 men in the regular Royal Canadian Naval Service at the beginning of the war. So the RCNVR, the Royal Canadian Naval Reserve of Volunteers, steps up to double, triple, quadruple, times 10 the naval forces over the course of the war. Everybody was a volunteer. They were known as the Wavy Navy. Do you know why?
No.
If you were in the regular force in the Navy, you had a bar or two on your sleeve ranking, and it would be a solid, straight bar. If you were volunteer, the bar was wavy like the ocean.
Oh.
That's why it was called the Wavy Navy. So the other very important ingredient in this whole equation was C.D. Howe. He was then the Minister of Supply and Services, previously the Minister of Transport. He was the Minister of
everything, as they call it.
You got it. Yeah. Well, and he said, we're going to spend the millions to do all this because we need the ships. We need to build the Corvette Navy, for example, which would provide the escorts that the Canadians needed to deliver the freight and fuel to Britain. And they would also stimulate the interest at the community level. A lot of the Corvettes were named after cities and towns right across Canada. And C.D. Howe got his $1 a year men, the people who were the kings and queens of industry across Canada, for $1 a year to help stimulate the investment by local communities in Canada to build those Corvettes. So it's right across the board, this sudden explosion of the need to defend the convoys to getting to Europe, to give us the ability to keep the war going on that side of the ocean, and then the chance to jump off and end it in 1945.
C.D. Howe got a first-hand look at the Battle of the Atlantic in a way that I had never heard before.
It's a great story.
Tell the story.
Well, he obviously needed to keep contact with Britain to understand what the needs were. So he, at one point, boards a passenger vessel. I think it was originally a CP passenger vessel, was transformed into a small troop ship, and they're torpedoed in mid-Atlantic. And he, with 2 or 3 other guys, are literally in lifeboats. Had the Germans only known who had essentially had to dive into the water or survive in lifeboats, C.D. Howe and the others, they could have captured, in effect, the people who were masterminding the construction of the ships that would defeat them. But they end up in the brink. They're picked up by a number of Canadian ships and others, some hours later, nearly frozen. But they carry on. C.D. Howe continues. And this whole event of nearly dying in the mid-Atlantic, torpedoed, moves him and inspires him, makes him recognize the need for what he's fulfilling, and that is to deliver the goods to Britain.
You've got a quote in the book says, "I considered every hour that I've lived from that day onward to be borrowed time."
Yeah.
C.D. Howe
Not a very emotional guy, but boy, emotional there.
Yeah. Okay, you want to know what it's like to be on a boat that's just been hit by a torpedo? Here's the first-hand diary account from Ted's book. Sheldon, let's bring this one up. Board 2. After 3 tense minutes comes the detonation, his war diary stated. There is a loud explosion, roar, and rumbling. Then come columns of water followed by columns of fire. Weighing nearly 30,000 tons, Royal Oak rolled on her side and sank in 13 minutes, taking 835 of her complement of 1,234 to their deaths. Ted, what are you describing here?
That's actually a reference from the U-boat commander, Gunther Prien, who has attacked the Royal Oak inside Scapa Flow in 1939.
Which is where?
This is the massive ship, military ship fortress in the Shetlands, and Scapa Flow is essentially the home base for all these for the Royal Naval Fleet, and he finds a 50-meter gap or something in the torpedo nets to prevent any torpedoes or U-boats from getting in. He literally takes his U-boat into the middle of the Scapa Flow and shoots. Actually, initially, some of the first torpedoes are duds. So he's there for like an hour before he actually lands the torpedoes that sink the Royal Oak, taking all those sailors to their deaths. And he manages to get away. He gets back to Germany, and he's considered a hero for having taken the war right into the backyard of the British.
We mentioned C.D. Howe a moment ago, and throughout the course of our conversation, I want to drop a few other names on you because people will not know that they have a connection to this Battle of the Atlantic. John Grierson was one of this country's great documentary filmmakers. Lauren Greene, one of this country's great actors.
The voice of doom.
The voice of doom, you got it. What role did they play in this war?
Well, if you're going to win a war, you have to convince the minds and the hearts across the country that this is worth doing and necessary. And the National Film Board, I learned when I did some research, was actually born in 1939, before the war is declared. But suddenly when it is, the need to create propaganda films on this side for the Allies is vital to convince Canadians this is worth winning. And so John Grierson, who's actually Scottish-born, comes to Canada and is invited to take on the role of shooting the first films about Canada's role in the war, called Canada Carries On. And one of them highlights the role of the Merchant Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy delivering all those goods to Britain. It's called Churchill's Island. And that's the film he shoots with the propaganda message, "We will overcome." And the voiceover, of course, in the film is none other than Lauren Greene, Paul Cartwright, for those who remember Bonanza. But essentially bringing all of the forces of filmmaking, documentary filmmaking. In fact, Grierson managed to get captured film of German launches of U-boats, and Hitler and the Inner Circle in wherever the heck he was also incorporated into that film. So we're taken literally to the war front from the German side and the Canadian side as the battle is raging.
Here's another name. Those who remember watching Hockey Night in Canada as kids, Murray Westgate. Who was he? What's his connection?
Murray Westgate was born in Regina and desperately wanted to get away from Regina. When the war came along, he thought it was a perfect ticket. So he joins the Navy expecting that he's going to be sent to war, he'll come back glorious hero having conquered whatever. They sent him to Gaspé, which is on the coast, the southern coast of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And he thinks, to the ends of the earth, nothing is happening here. Well, turns out that Murray gets sent there because he's a telegraphist and he's really strong as the capable telegraphist, and he's positioned in a position where he's monitoring ship movement through the Cabot Strait, which is between Cape Breton and Nova Scotia and Port aux Basques, Newfoundland. And he's monitoring ships at that location thinking like nothing's going to happen. The war isn't going to happen here. Well, the Canadians open, the Royal Canadian Navy opens HMCS Fort Ramsay, showing Canadian strength on the frontier, like guarding the Quebec coastline with a few small ships and men. And Murray is there. 9 days later, a U-boat penetrates the Cabot Strait, and without expecting anything, the Canadians are suddenly finding themselves with shipwrecked sailors washing ashore in Gaspé. Ian Tate, who's another Royal Canadian Navy volunteer, he also thinks he's being sent to the ends of the earth from Port Hope. Out he goes to Gaspé, expert photographer. He takes pictures of these shipwrecked sailors being rescued by local civilians in Gaspé. A guy named Jack Braley is there from Canadian Press, down from Montreal on a junket to again see what Canada's coastal forces are looking like. And René Lévesque is there with Radio Canada, and all of their reports back about the first U-boat attacks in the Gulf of St. Lawrence are censored. And so we have this tug of war between the Canadian government fighting to keep this horrible story of U-boats penetrating the Gulf of St. Lawrence under wraps, and the press trying to get it out there to make sure we do something about it. The U-boats sank 17 merchant ships in 6 months, 3 U.S. Navy ships and 2 Royal Canadian warships, all between May and October of that year. And then they sank the SS Caribou, a passenger liner going from North Sydney to Port aux Basques, killing 137 civilians in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
So where does this notion come from that somehow Canadian territory was immune from attack during World War II? There was a battle in the St. Lawrence River.
Yes, because we thought that the Battle of the Atlantic was in the Atlantic, from Halifax east, from St. John's east, out into the North Atlantic. And indeed, that's where it was. But when the U-boats penetrated unexpectedly, and they found, a happy hunting ground in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, they got exactly what they set out to do. Eventually, so many losses in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and all of our ships are at sea, not in the Gulf, and the U-boats go as far upriver as Rimouski, almost to Quebec City, sinking willy-nilly wherever they could find ships. Shipping is shut down, which is exactly what the Germans wanted ultimately. And we're crippled by the fact that we don't have that link between Montreal and Quebec City and the coast, Halifax and St. John's, to keep our war effort alive.
There were efforts by Britain to evacuate children out of the United Kingdom to safer places. And I wonder what have you been able to find out about how successful those efforts were?
Well, this was an initiative that Churchill did not like. Any suggestion that Britons should leave the UK suggested for Winston Churchill that we were running, that we were not winning, that we were retreating, and he didn't like the idea. But the notion of keeping children safe was an important one, and so the evacuations went on early in 1940-41, and a number of ships depart quite successfully, delivering children from especially the large cities in Britain to Canada for safety. But then there are sinkings, and then there are losses, and then this whole effort is stopped. Again, Churchill saying we cannot be seen to be retreating, and we're giving up children's lives at a cost that's immeasurable.
All right, final 2 months of 1942, 80% of shipping losses in transatlantic convoys had occurred when Canadian warships were escorting. That's what you tell us in the book. What do we infer from that?
We infer that we were on the losing end of the war. In fact, that was, I think the academic historians would agree with me, that this is a period during which the Germans could have won the Battle of the Atlantic and essentially ended our efforts to keep Britain alive, because they were sinking more ships than we were allowed to build in time to replenish. And so essentially what was happening there is that the Canadians were stretched thin. We've got too few men stretched across too many corvettes, covering too much territory of the North Atlantic to protect the convoys, and then these horrific losses. But we were also facing, in addition to dealing with 80% of the losses in that period, November, December 1942, we were facing half the U-boat force in the North Atlantic, which meant that the statistics were what they were. We were losing. So Churchill calls King, Mackenzie King, and says, the Canadians are off the North Atlantic as of right now. And then they're brought to England so that their ships, the Canadian ships, can be fitted with the same detection equipment, detecting U-boats underwater, and defensive and offensive weaponry that the Royal Navy in Britain and the U.S. Navy in the United States have had for 3 years. We didn't have that. We were the poor sisters technologically. So we get the gear, we get the training. The Canadians are then sent in early 1943 on Operation Torch, which is the big movement of troops and ships from England to North Africa to fight the Africa Corps, Rommel. And en route, the Canadians are escorting as a bit of a respite from the North Atlantic, and they sink 3 U-boats in a month. Louis, now Lord Batten, reviews the Canadians in Algiers and calls them a wonderful bunch of young bastards.
Yeah. Well, now, but there's another moment in your book where Mackenzie King, our Prime Minister, is telling Churchill, Britain's Prime Minister, Canadian ships are doing 40% of the work in the North Atlantic. Churchill didn't know that, did he?
He didn't. He didn't. He thought that the Canadians were sort of like peripheral, and in fact they were integral. They were in the center of it all. And after the episode in the Mediterranean, where the Canadians are obviously dealing much more readily with the better equipment, chemistry and gelled crews on board those corvettes, they're able to sink the 3 U-boats because they can see the edges of the Mediterranean. It's not thousands and thousands of feet deep, it's a few hundred feet deep, and they knock off these 3 U-boats. And then what happens? Churchill allows the Canadians to go back to the North Atlantic, and the turning of the tide begins, because by May of 1943, the big massive U-boat packs, the wolf packs, the packs that Karl Donitz calls Rudeltaktik, the wolf packs, are broken up by the Canadians, ultimately, in that horrible no man's land. They called it the Black Gap because it was the area where the Air Force attempted to protect the convoys but had to return home from Iceland or from the UK or from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia because they were running out of fuel. That middle area of the Atlantic is a horrid killing ground for the U-boats. But eventually, the Canadians turned the tide because of the capability they're given with the new weaponry and the greater skill, and eventually more air coverage to knock out the U-boats in mid-1943.
Was Churchill grateful to King for the clearly much bigger role we played than he thought?
Good question. The memoir kind of alludes to that. But I don't think he ever really applauds the Canadians. Of course, he comes to Canada and he delivers the great speech about some chicken, some neck, and it gets a great applause in the House of Commons, and then goes shortly thereafter into the portraiture office of Joseph Karsh. The
best photo ever.
Just stolen.
Yes, right.
And it's that wonderful moment where he's, the center of attention in Canada for another great speech. But I don't think he really paid much of attention to the role that Canadians had played really until the end of the war.
Well, all right, since you've taken us there, let's go there. The war ends. German U-boats are on the Atlantic doing their whatever it is they do.
In sort of lone wolf attacks now, not the big wolf packs.
How did they get the news that the war was over and Germany had surrendered?
Well, there's a really neat story from a WREN, a Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service volunteer, a woman named Margaret Lose. Margaret, you probably met her too in some of our gatherings around Remembrance Day. She was always attending the RCMI and all those wonderful places where stories such as this would emerge. She was a Huff Duff radio operator, high-frequency direction finding. This was a radio device the Allies had, the Germans didn't realize we had it. It was able to pick up German U-boat transmissions, not in terms of exactly what they were saying, but where they were located, simply by direction finding. And then she would pass them. She's sitting at HMCS Coverdale in Moncton, and listening to these transmissions of U-boats back to occupied France and Germany. She takes the information, passes them on to Bletchley Park, where Enigma is being decoded by 10,000 people.
Alan Turing.
Yes, and there was a Canadian involved in that story as well in the book. But Margaret reports these locations, which are then passed along to Admiralty, which are then passed along to the merchant sailors, and they avoid where the transmissions are located, where the U-boats are. So a small element of a Canadian woman in the WRENs delivering information to keep us safer on those transatlantic crossings.
Now, we know from other examples in war that sometimes the word comes in that the war's over and you have to stand down, and they don't. How did the German soldiers in this case react? Well,
when Margaret was on the radio in 1945, right in May, she was the first among the Luftwaffe operators to hear in plain German that Hitler had committed suicide and that Admiral Dönitz had received the Reich's presidency and was then given the job of telling the U-boats to surrender wherever they were. And by and large, they did. 2 came into North Atlantic, or into Canadian and Newfoundland waters at the end of the war, and huge celebrations essentially were focused on these surrenders as a means of illustrating that the war at sea is finally over. But it had taken 2,074 days to get there.
Here's a crazy story. The war is over, and yet Halifax, which had been spared up until then, goes crazy. What happened?
Everybody wanted to celebrate because they got, I mean, even though Margaret was keeping the information about Hitler's suicide, you know, quiet because it was passed along to Bletchley, the word broke out that ultimately the Germans were going to surrender any day. And Admiral Murray, who is the only Canadian in command of a theater of war in the Second World War. He was commanding the Northwest Atlantic, the waters there essentially defending the convoys from the U-boats. Now it's his moment of glory, and he tells all of his naval personnel, something like 60,000 people in Halifax, open gangplank, meaning go and celebrate. Meantime, the mayor is saying, close up your shops because the Navy's coming, and there's this butting of heads. And suddenly the friction breaks out into violence, streetcars are destroyed, people are killed, businesses are destroyed, and poor Admiral Murray's reputation and victory are in tatters.
We sustained more losses in Halifax in peacetime, after the war was over, than we did during the war.
Yeah, and the destruction to the city's reputation and the Navy's reputation, unfortunately, for allowing that to happen. And it happened over 2 days, May 7th and 8th, 1945. And it was just a horrific end for a tremendous victory for Canadians.
This is why we love having you here. You tell great stories, and you bring attention to things that require attention.
Thank you.
That have not had them. Ted Barris, Battle of the Atlantic, Gauntlet to Victory. Ted, as always, great job, and thanks for coming in.
A pleasure to be here, especially this week. Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, November 9th, 2022. Canada has set new, ambitious immigration targets, but tomorrow we'll find out why concerns continue about the existing backlog. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.